Hello everyone, my name is Chris Davis. I'm the video and feature producer over at 4Player Network, and this is my list of the top 10 games of 2012. Assassin's Creed has consistently been the most interesting new IP to come about this generation, and I've enjoyed each jump back into the animus across the 5 games that have been released since 2007, so series fatigue wasn't really a factor for me. I really have to hand it to Ubisoft for the work they put into Assassin's Creed 3, as it gives us an interesting new hero in the form of a Native American, which offers perspective on the war, fictional that it may be, that isn't really considered within the confines of a high school history book. While I found Connor to be an interesting character and his relationship with both the Assassins and Templars as a sort of peace broker, an enjoyable take on the endless war between the two factions, I found this core narrative focus to be lacking. And while I can appreciate this new interest in building the drama between Connor and his Templar targets, I thought it was far overdeveloped than it should have been. Assassin's Creed's best moments have been as you go in to finally kill your target. With this title, the process of stalking a target drags on far too long. And in the end, Connor isn't given a particularly enjoyable ending either, as is indicative of what really happened during the Revolutionary War, and following it for that matter. It feels like Connor was thrown by the wayside, and of the 3 primary Animus characters we've come to experience, he seems to be the weakest of the 3 in terms of story and experience. For me, however, I found myself focusing more on Desmond, our true main character of the series. And finally, after 5 games, Desmond finally got a chance to shine. Desmond's missions in Assassin's Creed 3 easily stood out as most interesting of them all, possibly more than the entirety of Connor's story. Exploring the several missions you go on as Desmond in 2012 were exciting and fun with the lack of any HUD or details to guide you along. Unlocking the new sections of the First Civilization Vault were exciting, and it was always the first thing I did upon returning from a mission. My only wish is that there was even more to do as Desmond, as it just seems that he was kind of thrown under the bus by both fans and critics. One can't forget to mention the game's multiplayer, but unlike the previous 2 games that contained it, I found myself pretty alienated by it. The meta-story within it is gone, replaced by some commercialized heap of uninteresting crap, and some quote-unquote refined gameplay mechanics that make it faster and far less interesting than the Turing test-focused mechanics I came to love in Brotherhood, and even more so in Revelations. It kind of felt for me like what happened going from the multiplayer of Splinter Cell Chaos Theory to that of Splinter Cell Double Agent. Good ideas that were destroyed by a focus on faster and less interesting gameplay. In short, Assassin's Creed 3 was a fantastic game, but it had too many flaws to make it further down on my list. I look forward to the inevitable AC4 and the new focus the series seems to be going on, but I only hope it just gets better than what we have here. I remember back when isometric turn-based strategy titles were exciting, but I wasn't on the scene back in the day. While I remember the likes of Crusader No Remorse, I've never really held these games in my heart in the same way that many others do. Case in point, I didn't find myself particularly interested once XCOM Enemy Unknown was announced, but with the 2K Marin first-person reboot of the series garnering my attention thanks to how similar the gameplay appeared in comparison to one of my favorite franchises, Brothers in Arms. It wasn't really until PAX Prime, barely a month and change before the game was due to come out, that my attention was gained, and I latched onto the title like a facehugger to the character Kane in Alien. Playing XCOM is a measure in patience and frustration, as you warily move your soldiers throughout the battlefield into the unknown, completely scared that a mutant will come out of nowhere and rip apart one of your team members. Enemy Unknown stands as a prime example of the type of game a save scummer like myself occupies entire sectors of their hard drive playing, saving after almost every move in fear that, come the next turn, they'll be annihilated. It's certainly not an easy game, and I dread even the thought of bumping the difficulty up to Iron Man mode, which makes all decisions permanent. Satisfying the needs of all the nations supporting your operation is next to impossible at times, without proper planning. You can never expect to do well on your first run through the game, but it certainly is exciting. Probably my favorite feature of XCOM has to be the random nature by which the game operates. Battles are never the same from encounter to encounter, and even when off mission at your base of operations, you are constantly anxious of your alarms going off as you race to upgrade your weapons and armor, afraid that the next encounter will force you to choose between two requests from two nations on the verge of ruin. Enemy Unknown is a tense, thrilling adventure, and if you're a sci-fi aficionado like me, you certainly have to give it a try. You know, I've never been really one for a racing game. Heck, as a kid, the only racing games you could really convince me to play were Mario Kart and Cruising USA. To this day, you can't convince me to play a game like Forza or Gran Turismo, and I've mostly grown out of Nintendo's beloved kart racer. There is one franchise I'm still excited for, and my introduction to it last generation was a wonderful experience. I'm talking about Burnout, the arcade racing series from Criterion Games. Criterion's last true Burnout title was Burnout Paradise in 2007. Little did anyone know that they would soon be handed the reins of another well-known racing series, Need for Speed. 2 years ago, they revamped the popular entry Hot Pursuit in what felt like Mario Kart for adults. And just a scant few months ago, they released Most Wanted, an open-world racer that I'm proud to be an owner of. Criterion has always had their own approach to racers, and their work on the Need for Speed series is no exception. Whereas Hot Pursuit felt like a Burnout game with licensed cars and cool offensive and defensive weapons to use when running from the cops, Most Wanted is essentially Burnout Paradise 2, offering a vast open world to get lost in. I say that last part with absolute sincerity, as even 2 weeks past purchasing the game, I'm still getting lost. There's a sort of meta-narrative, wherein you must earn street cred in order to take on the most illegal racers in the game. But really, at the heart of the game is the true Criterion formula: exploring your surroundings and destroying your opponents at more than 100 miles an hour. Throughout my time with Most Wanted, I never really got bored at any turn. Racing other street thugs was fun, plowing through billboards was always a guilty pleasure, and getting more airtime from jumps than half the US airports is damn near cackle-worthy. The act of running from the police is easily the highlight of the game, and never got to the point in which I could ever consider rage quitting. Need for Speed Most Wanted is easily the most fun I've had since, well, Hot Pursuit 2 years ago. It's just a shame that it was released on the same day as Assassin's Creed 3, as only the Criterion faithful probably popped that in without the need to chop up redcoats taking over their minds, and because of that probably led to very poor sales numbers for the game. Just keep this in mind. If you've been looking for a fun arcade-style racer, you can't do much better than Most Wanted. One of the reasons I got into writing about games was to learn about the stories about how games come to be. Anyone in the industry will tell you that you never want to see how the sausage is made, but disgusting as that analogy may be, I was really interested in learning about the process and the debate on how a whole game goes from a concept on a piece of paper to a fully developed product 2 to 4 years later. Dust, an Elysian tale, is a great example of a story that's worth telling. Dust was conceptualized, drawn, developed, animated, written, and released all by one guy, Dean Dodrill, a guy who won the 2009 Microsoft Dream Build Play Challenge and was awarded an XNA contract to release Dust as a full-on Xbox Live Arcade title. Other than a part of the writing and the soundtrack, this beautiful 60 frames per second game that you are watching right now was made by one guy. One guy! That is amazing! Beyond just the story behind us, there's a really fun experience to be had. Exploring never gets boring, there are plenty of side quests to complete, and there's a bunch of hidden things to find within the world. I've never really been one for Metroidvania titles, but this one in particular never got on my nerves at all. Combat in Dust is fast and fun thanks to the inclusion of the Dust Storm ability, which deploys a vastly powerful magic attack when done in conjunction with your companion Fidget. And the parry system allows you to stun your opponents and deal out massive damage should you have the proper timing. Though others would argue otherwise, Dust is also fairly well written. So well in fact that I found myself cheering on our heroes and being confused once the scene shifted to the bad guy that you meet at the end of the game. There's also some really dark tones to the writing as well, with topics such as racism and genocide hidden within this rather colorful world with bunny and cat people. Overall, Dust is the indie game that could for me in 2012. and is more than worthy of taking my number 7 spot. It used to be a rare thing when an open world game would come on the scene. The thing is, most open world titles have relegated themselves to being third-person games, focused on either overly dramatic crime dramas or that of a weak, watered-down superhero experience. Someone at Ubisoft deserves a bonus for having the balls to create the dark shooter Far Cry 2 was, and the experience was upgraded fantastically with the third entry in the series. The story of Jason Brody's ill-planned excursion to a South Pacific paradise island, and the subsequent kidnapping of him and his friends by a gang of pirates is a thrilling one to be sure, but it also stands as one of the biggest flaws for the game. The development of Jason's character is far less inviting than one would believe, and your primary opponent, Vass, one of the most interesting villains in any game since Andrew Ryan, is gone before you know it, replaced by a guy who doesn't have the tenth of the character or madness that Vass oozed out of every pore. For a story-focused guy like me, this would have been more than enough to exclude Far Cry 3 from my top 10 list, but the gameplay more than makes up for this terrible design decision. Gameplay-wise, there is very little in Far Cry 3 to not enjoy. Driving mechanics are unchanged since the previous game, which is a good thing. The various classes of AI that the pirates exhibit offer a rather nice challenge to those who are more bang-bang than sneak-sneak like myself, and the new enjoyable hunting mechanics come with some interesting animal AI that makes hunting predators actually a dangerous thing to do. I was very happily surprised when I found out about the game's stealth-oriented gameplay, and took to it like a fish to water, as you have seen from the footage you've been watching in these top 10 videos. The thrill of the hunt and stalking enemy bases, marking targets, and taking them out quietly was an exercise that could have been accomplished in a matter of seconds, but one in which I would spend upwards of half an hour planning out before executing. Far Cry 3 has its flaws to be sure, but there are at least a couple dozen hours of gameplay to enjoy and experience here. If you watched any of the videos I've been in, caught any of the broadcasts I've ever done, or read anything I've ever written, you should probably know by now that I'm not a high fantasy guy. To me, this genre of RPGs has always been a land of boring, cliched plots built around humans hating goblins, and kings making power plays, and yada yada yada. I was more than prepared to ignore The Witcher 2's Enhanced Edition, which arrived back in April, until, on an off chance, I applied to CD Projekt Red for a review copy, and was subsequently granted one. As you probably discerned by now, I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it. Built around a series of novels based on Slavic mythology and not the usual orcs and elves crap, The Witcher story of Geralt of Rivia and his quest to clear his name for the brutal assassination of a king is a visceral tale of politics, magic, and grasp for power that had me excited throughout the entire experience. It's easy for a player like myself who never played the previous game to be in the dark about many of the core plot elements of the universe, but the Enhanced Edition does a nice job of trying to bring the player up to speed. Combat in The Witcher 2 is a decidedly brutal and unforgiving experience. There isn't a single encounter in the game that could not result in Geralt's death, and more often than not, you'll find yourself looking at the game over screen if you don't learn to master the game's magic, potion, and weapon systems. Many of the later fights in the game will be over in less than 10 seconds if you're not careful. Despite this, it's still quite strong and enjoyable. Plus it has the best combat music since the original Star Trek series. I mean seriously, I dare you not to use that as a ringtone for your ex. Simply put, if you're a fan of RPGs, you definitely have to check out The Witcher 2. Especially the Enhanced Edition with all the things they've added in on the core experience. It's definitely one of the best games of this year. Many of the games on my list are big blockbuster titles that must be in every living room. However, there is no more thought-provoking game on this list than Spec Ops: The Line. It appeared in June to little or no notoriety, save for a few quick reviews from the various outlets, and the game community's focus on the impending fall release season that was just a month away from beginning. It's such a damn shame that our community has overlooked this game, and it really needs to be re-examined. A reboot of the rather mediocre Spec Ops shooter series, The Line is anything but worthy of that one-word description. The story of Captain Walker and his squad mates' journey to an apocalyptic Dubai may sound like a typical cover-based shooter, and at the heart of its gameplay, it's a very strong and competent one. It's when you get to the story, when you really see the strengths of this game. The Line is a dark tale of human survival at the end of the world, and the darkness of the human heart when one has to choose between living and dying. Walker's quest to stop Colonel Conrad quickly turns a reconnaissance mission into a vendetta, introducing the player to human depravity and, eventually, insanity. The mission into this devastated city where madness has taken hold everywhere, even where it's in the player outside of the game. Loading screens will initially give gameplay tips, but later on, they begin to condemn your actions in the game, calling you a murderer and a monster for the choices Walker is forced to make. Nowhere else in the line is this more evident than during a mid-game event that, while I won't spoil it, completely changes the way you've thought about the story. It's a shocking event that makes you feel terrible, and continuing on from there, it doesn't get any better. Spec Ops: The Line, within the confines of a typical third-person shooter, hides a rather intense and disturbing tale that is not to be missed by any adult who enjoys a good yarn. Just don't let any kids in the room when you play this game. Ever. I'm more than likely bending the rules when it comes to what constitutes a game in these top 10 lists, but considering I'm the one that's been making these damn videos, I think I'll allow myself a little leniency. Half-Life was probably one of the most important games ever made, and Half-Life 2 changed the way we look at the silent protagonist, while presenting an experience that, in almost all respects, still stands up almost a decade after its release. Shortly after the release of Half-Life 2, Valve decided to port Half-Life 1 to the sequel's source engine, and the results only affected a minor fraction of what fans really wanted them to do. One particular group of fans did more than just that. They completely remade Half-Life 1. Black Mesa, after 8 years in the making, is every bit what Valve created in 1998 and so much more. Many of the levels are faithful recreations of the original shooter, while others cut down the filler meant to demonstrate the physics and mechanics that were unique to Half-Life 1 at the time, but are very commonplace today. Every single memorable moment from Half-Life 1 is contained within, with full animation and voice work alongside every scene to be found. Heck, those who have been waiting on Valve to learn to count to 3 will be glad to see the faces of a young Isaac Kleiner and Eli Vance once again. Fully developed AI has been built in for every single enemy in the game. The weapons have been revamped, and pretty much every Half-Life in-joke is included. The game also features a reimagined soundtrack that is both kick-ass and strongly evocative of the style that Valve has been using in the series. Honestly, I could go on and on about just what makes Black Mesa such a fantastic experience, but the fact of the matter is that even despite missing the Zen chapters towards the end of the game, and the fact that crouch jumping is used for absolutely everything, it's a free standalone source mod. It's free! 8 to 10 hours of remarkable craftsmanship available for free. It's a love letter to all Half-Life fans, and while our wait for a proper return to the HEV suit of everyone's favorite crowbar-wielding theoretical physicist has been an excruciating one, Black Mesa does all the right things to help deaden the pain. Ever since QuakeCon 2011, when I first got my chance to take a look at Dishonored, I've been shouting my excitement from every rooftop and mountain peak to anybody that would listen. Heck, I don't believe anybody here at 4Player really understood my infatuation with this game until E3 2012, when the rest of us finally got to see the gameplay in action. There's a whole list of reasons why it was our game of the show that year, mine included. For one, it's the most competent stealth game I've played in years, probably the best one made since Metal Gear Solid 4. Creeping through the streets of Dunwall past waves of patrolling guards, then taking to the rooftops suddenly with your incredibly useful blink power makes for a thrilling experience every time. Stalking your target and waiting for the right moment to strike is immensely satisfying. Honestly, this assassination title is probably better than most of the Assassin's Creed games combined. For me though, the best part of Dishonored was the ability to go through the entire game without killing anyone. Even the primary targets can be dealt with in less than lethal means, often resigning them to a far worse fate than dying. It's a far more fitting punishment for the conspirators in the game than a simple blade through the neck, and one I try to commit to every single time I play. A no alarm, no power, no kill run is probably the ultimate thrill to be had in Dishonored, and one I think everyone should try. Beyond the gameplay though, Arcane Studios has built a really interesting universe to explore. This neo-Victorian world that's heavily inspired by the likes of Half-Life 2 is filled to the brim with books, manuscripts, and so much that fleshes out the world in a wonderful way. Despite having completed 3 runs through Dishonored, I can't help but feel the urge to return to it every now and then, since there is so much I have yet to explore. Dishonored is a fantastic start to what will hopefully be a long-standing franchise, and I can't wait to explore the other cities of the Empire and perhaps the Pandician continent. I know I'm going to be reviled in the comments for my choice, but I can't help it. I love Mass Effect 3, so much so that it's my Game of the Year for 2012. As of this recording, I've done 2 full run-throughs. One on normal, the other on Sanity, equating to about 40 hours per run. I've spent over 130 hours playing Mass Effect 3's multiplayer mode, so combined, I've enjoyed Mass Effect 3 for over 200 hours, and that number is only going to continue to climb. It's my most played game of the year, so mathematically, it should be my favorite of 2012 anyway. But my love for what BioWare put together here runs far deeper than the numbers could ever indicate. Whether or not you enjoy the end of this exceptional sci-fi trilogy, you can't look at Mass Effect 3 and tell me it is anything but well done. The Reaper invasion of the galaxy made for a strong drama about desperation in the face of annihilation. I was completely drawn in from the opening salvo of the war until the game's rather startling ending. It contains some wonderful send-offs, the characters we've come to love over the course of the past 5 years, and built tension and excitement in all the right places. The combat was solid, with your teammates actually seeming to know what they were doing this time around. And the challenge level was engaging and satisfying. Heck, even the Kinect features of the game worked, and that's something you can't say the majority of the time. BioWare has continued to support Mass Effect 3 post-launch in a rather delightful way, and has made the experience even better. They've doubled the multiplayer map count and character class options, offered new takes on existing maps, and even created a whole new faction to fight against. All for free! The single-player downloadable content has expanded further on the Mass Effect universe, and never felt like it wasn't worth investing in. Heck, to satiate fans that were frothing at the mouth, they released an extended ending update, giving fans closure and proof that life will go on after this war has ended. Again, many fans will complain about where the series went with Mass Effect 3. In many ways, I agree with them. Sure, your decisions in the previous games didn't deliver in the fashion that we wanted them to, and perhaps the focus on the Crucible could have been shifted towards providing a more sunshine and lollipop type of ending for everyone. I'm not about to shit on Mass Effect 3 as a whole, just because the last 5% of the game didn't appease everyone. Mass Effect 3 is a great ending to a long, wonderful journey that explored an in-depth, deep universe of racial tension, mistrust, and desperation in the face of extinction, and I'm very happy with what BioWare brought to us. So there you have it, guys, my list of the top 10 games of 2012. I really appreciate all of you watching these videos, as it's taken me a long time to make them. If you wouldn't mind, please consider leaving feedback below, and if you enjoyed them, also consider subscribing at 4pp.tv. Again, thanks for watching, and we look forward to playing with you all in 2013.